back to Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast. I say welcome back because I've been gone 2 weeks. So, you know, I'm assuming that you've been waiting with bated breath for the next episode. I'm your host, Mike Luck, the Ectoplasmic Man. I hope you liked the old-timey intro music. I thought it was fitting for today. Today, we're going to talk about a certain lost chapter of history that involves none other than the man, Harry Houdini himself. However, this is... I'm thinking back on that intro music, and it's kind of a little too lighthearted. This is actually some dark stuff, potentially. Now, everybody knows that Houdini was a crusader against false mediums, bullshit artists. I'm not gonna mince words. He was out to stop them all. He saw that these people were exploitative, that they were, basically taking advantage of people's mourning in a time when, this is hot on the heels of the First World War and the Spanish flu epidemic. Tons and tons and tons of deaths, and people just, I guess regular religion wasn't cutting it for people. They needed some kind of outlet. They needed some kind of assurance that their loved ones were doing okay in the hereafter. And sure enough, there was a market ready to exploit that. But with the advent of this new quote-unquote religion, spirituality, whatever you want to call it, called spiritualism, seances, table tapping, ectoplasm. Yeah, that's what that is, ectoplasm. A whole new belief system opened up, and some people in certain high places had a lot invested, apparently, in this new belief system. But there are potentially darker things than that going on in the background. We're going to get into that. This episode is entitled Houdini, the Crandons, and Missing Children, a.k.a. the Ghostfarm. Yeah, we're going to pay some bills real quick, and then we're going to jump right into the episode. Do you hate hangovers? I know I do. Almost makes me not want to drink, but how will I go on not drinking? Luckily, there's liqueur. Liquure. Liqueur. Liqueur. See? You see what they did there? Liqueur gummies combine DHM, milk thistle, B vitamins, and ginger root to help your body recover after drinking. They fight fatigue, nausea, and dehydration, so you wake up feeling refreshed. Try them for faster recovery and enjoy an exclusive discount with my promo code. Go to liqueur.com, Liquure.com, and use the promo code ICON for 20% off any product, your entire purchase, exclusive through Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts. Thank you. Life can be pretty, gosh darn, hectic, we'll say. And that's probably an understatement. Luckily, there's Shimmerwood beverages. They are infused with CBD. They're seltzers, and they combine full-spectrum CBD with natural fruit shrubs, delivering a refreshing, stress-relieving drink that eases tensions and promotes relaxation. And we could all, we could all really calm down a little bit lately, don't you think? Go to shimmerwood.com. Use my exclusive promo code ICON, ICON, at shimmerwood.com for 30% off any product, your entire purchase. These CBD-infused drinks make you feel a bit of all right. Shimmerwood.com. Can you tell that advertising is new to me? I'll get the hang of it. Oh boy. Okay, so, Houdini. Marjorie and Leroy Crandon. Missing kids. What's going on with this story? Well, not many people know this. The Great Escape artist, Harry Houdini, operated as an unofficial secret agent in several contexts, especially during and after World War I. While not formally a spy in the cloak and dagger sense, he was very much used as an intelligence asset, particularly due to his fame, his ability to travel freely, and his social access to powerful people. Houdini had relationships with U.S. diplomatic and military personnel who were interested in using his travels to gather informal intelligence while performing abroad. According to his close associate William Melville, head of British intelligence before MI5 and the real-life basis for the character M in the James Bond novels, Houdini may have provided information about political figures, security arrangements, and foreign sentiments in countries like Germany and Russia, who were a bit of a political hotspot at the time, if you don't remember your history. He allegedly used his cover as a performer to enter restricted areas or test the security of certain institutions like jails, police headquarters, or embassies without raising suspicion. He was a frequent, quote-unquote, special consultant to various institutions and law enforcement agencies, the illustrious Scotland Yard being one of them. There's also strong circumstantial evidence Houdini collaborated with William Melville in the founding of British secret intelligence services. Some scholars believe Melville enlisted Houdini to test escape-proof facilities in Europe and to report on anarchist or political groups. Anarchists were the big boogeyman at the time. In The Secret Life of Houdini by William Kalush and Larry Sloman from 2006, the authors argue that Houdini operated as a spy or asset for both U.S. and British intelligence and or federal-level law enforcement agencies, though this has been challenged by skeptics. However, much of what has been challenged by skeptics, we'll get into, there is lots of circumstantial evidence for some very dark happenings going on in the background of his campaign against fraudulent mediums, which may have had an undercover component. Houdini sometimes infiltrated seances in disguise or used false identities and surveillance tactics to expose fraudulent psychics. This is especially interesting when considering the battle with the notorious Boston medium Mina, aka Marjorie Crandon. She was referred to as Marjorie in most early press release type stuff because they didn't want to give out her real name, but her fame preceded her after a while and just kind of went by Marjorie and just rolled with it. So, some accounts imply Houdini was used by skeptics and even elements of government or the scientific establishment to prevent fraudulent psychics from gaining power or influence, especially during a time when spiritualism was merging with early psychology and even state-backed experiments. J.B. Ryan, early parapsychology. We'll find out later on that spiritualism actually went all the way to the White House. Few are truly aware of just how far-reaching the influence of the spiritualist movement actually was. Like I said, its tentacles ectoplasmically squirmed their way all the way into the White House. However, it's in this episode that we'll be applying an intense level of scrutiny to the aforementioned Marjorie Crandon, her husband, Dr. Leroy Crandon, L-E, L, little e, big L, little e, big R, little O-I, Leroy Crandon, and their alleged reputation of holding regular seances that stretched into the realms of what many at the time would probably call, quote-unquote, inappropriate. perhaps, even downright diabolically criminal in nature. This is some dark stuff coming up, actually, and I'm trying really hard to keep it light. So it's in this particular context that Houdini can be seen as more than just an entertainer, albeit one with a somewhat overzealous and in most cases rightfully justified drive to expose those vast numbers of utterly fraudulent and exploitative mediums, feeding off the mourning or despair of the masses, if not their outright naivete and credulity. In this light, Houdini became something of a covert moral crusader, waging war against the corrupt elites and occult manipulators. Someone who, in his capacity as a semi-deputized investigator, may have stumbled onto something darker than just fraud, that being possible instances of abuse or trafficking hidden behind the curtains of spiritualism. In fact, this may have even rendered him a threat in the eyes of powerful circles, which some speculate might be why he died under such strange circumstances. Alas, the famous quote-unquote punch may not have been as random as it seems. Although most people also don't know this, but the guy who punched him in the gut, he just punched him like 5 times in a row. He just wailed on the dude. So, I don't know. Seems like there was maybe a little emotional capacity behind it. Could be wrong. We'll find out. Let's take a quick look at some of our key figures and the context surrounding Marjorie Crandon, her doctor husband, before delving further into some of the much more lurid details surrounding the couple and their social circle, and peer into some of the much darker rumors involving missing children, as well as Harry Houdini's role in investigating such occult-related claims. Now, the way I've set this episode up, as I've said before, no one has been convicted. No one has had charges brought against them in any way. This is all based on circumstantial evidence and potential bits and pieces of history that have been dropped and discarded here and there. So when you put it all together, it forms a bit of a startling picture. So Marjorie Crandon, a.k.a. Mina Crandon, formerly Stewart, she was born 1888, died 1941. She was known as the medium of the century. Her claim to fame was that she was a famous American medium and spiritualist who gained notoriety during the 1920s for her seances, which allegedly produced physical manifestations such as levitating objects and quote-unquote ectoplasmic materializations. Oh my, the ectoplasm. We'll get into it. Her husband, Dr. Leroy Goddard Crandon, was a physician. He was often involved in Marjorie's seances and the investigations surrounding them. His position as a doctor gave the family some social standing and lent a veneer of credibility to Marjorie's mediumship in the eyes of some observers. There are controversies around him, many, actually. Some researchers suspect Dr. Crandon may have been complicit in or aware of fraudulent activities connected to the seances. I would almost say that that's a given. Say what you will about spiritualism and the the authenticity thereof, but I don't know. I hate to go back to that old argument that people were stupider back then, because it's not true. But they just didn't know all the tricks. Whereas Houdini was a magician. He knew all the tricks, literally. So, or, excuse me, illusions. He knew all the illusions.
So, this is the magic trick, huh?
Illusion, Michael. Trick is something a whore does for money.
Like many early 20th century spiritualist figures, Marjorie and her associates have occasionally been entangled in rumors involving child disappearances, trafficking, or even ritual abuse, though these claims are largely unsubstantiated or based on anecdotal hearsay. Or are they? Much like the Satanic Panic era of the 1970s to early 1990s, not to mention the many previous historical instances of so-called blood libel, so often attributed to the Jewish people, the 1920s saw heightened fears about occultism, cults, and satanic rituals, often projecting anxieties onto spiritualist circles. Such rumors sometimes emerge from local scandals, sensationalist media, or rival groups accusing other mediums of darker deeds. No direct evidence links Marjorie Crandon or her husband to such crimes, but there is a handful of, like I said, rather suspicious circumstantial evidence. Going to get into some quotes later. Things that people have said, certain things taking place in the background of these medium investigations, which have kept these rumors, or the fading phantasms thereof, haunting the fringes of occult folklore and conspiracy theory. Harry Houdini, born 1874, died from 5 punches in a row, eventually, in 1926, was a famed magician and escape artist who dedicated considerable effort to exposing fraudulent spiritualists and mediums. Much of his fervent motivation to do so may stem from the fact that Houdini's mother was actually quite a devout spiritualist in her own right, which likely influenced his lifelong interest in such arcane topics. He was fiercely determined to protect grieving families from deception and financial exploitation. Good on you, Harry. I'm just wild about Harry. One of Houdini's more intense investigations centered extensively upon the Boston medium Mina Marjorie Crandon during the 1920s. Despite his general skepticism, Marjorie managed to evade some of his more rigorous tests, making her one of the few mediums he couldn't definitively debunk. The same goes for numerous other so-called psychical researchers or paranormal investigators, many of whom were very well renowned in their respective fields. Though it will later be alleged that much of their selective indecisiveness, we'll say, may have in fact been largely in part due to the seductive feminine wiles of Marjorie Crandon herself, whose numerous quote-unquote performances of seances and spirit interactions have been described quite often as being bawdy, saucy, possibly even quite randy and very ribald. I would say so from what I've heard. Essentially any and every old-timey adjective one could conjure up that more often than not ever so slightly straddled the line between highly salacious to somewhat molesty even. Depending on who you talk to, that is. Houdini publicly denounced many seances as tricks, but Marjorie's phenomena were not... they weren't just ambiguous, they were just titillating enough to create controversy. And Houdini was aware of and sometimes investigated rumors about occult practices involving children, especially in the context of satanic panic-style hysteria surrounding spiritualist groups. He did not publicly associate Marjorie or her husband with these darker allegations, but he warned about the dangers of credulity in occult circles generally. Houdini's investigations sometimes crossed paths with rumors of ritual abuse or trafficking, though these were rarely substantiated in his time, as they are in most times. However, a detailed exploration of the occult rumors involving missing children during the early 20th century, especially as they relate to the spiritualist movement, and how these dark suspicions intersected with the Houdini-Crandon rivalry is definitely worth further investigation. The early 1900s saw a boom in spiritualism. Mediums claimed to contact the dead, often attracting grieving families. This era also experienced rising moral panic about secret societies, satanic rituals, and occult conspiracies, fueled by the sensationalist press, urbanization, and social anxieties. Various scandals and unfavorable views, we'll say, of groups like the Freemasons or the Mormons were certainly still fresh in everyone's minds due to numerous incidents from the preceding century. With increased industrial urbanization, reports of missing or trafficked children often became a part of this moral panic, framed as victims of Satanists or occult groups. These rumors, as they usually tend to be, were rarely backed by solid evidence, but spread widely, sowing fear and suspicion around spiritualist circles. Some spiritualist mediums were accused of using children in seances or ritualistic settings, either as vulnerable participants or symbolic sacrifices, we'll say. There were whispered accusations of mediums being involved in child trafficking rings or exploiting children for occult purposes. In many cases, children who simply went missing from poor or immigrant communities were linked, without proof, to occult groups, sometimes implicating prominent mediums or their extended social networks. Marjorie Crandon, one of the most famous of the 1920s, and her husband, Dr. Leroy Crandon, were frequently surrounded by controversy. While no direct evidence tied them to missing children, rumors circulated that their seances and quote-unquote ectoplasmic manifestations had darker undercurrents. The Crandons' high-profile trials and investigations attracted negative media attention, sometimes conflated with local reports of missing or endangered children. These rumors were likely amplified by Houdini's public crusade, which painted spiritualism broadly as deceptive and potentially dangerous, though Houdini himself never accused the Crandons outright of any child-related crimes. Although he did harbor certain suspicions, and may perhaps be very likely that he was to some covert degree possibly investigating such claims. While Houdini did not publicly accuse Marjorie or Dr. Crandon of child-related wrongdoing, his general criticism of spiritualism contributed to a climate where such rumors were allowed to flourish. Some researchers suggest Houdini may have privately explored darker leads, but any related official documentation or concrete proof remains either missing or somewhat inconclusive. Cases of missing children in cities like New York and Chicago were sometimes blamed on occultists or quote-unquote baby farms. Your guess is as good as mine, folks. Linked to a cult. No, I think I know what that means, and I don't care to think on it any longer. Have been linked to occult or spiritualist circles. These accusations were often just a form of scapegoating against various marginalized or even immigrant communities. The fact that media and law enforcement were often quite credulous of occult explanations for disappearances also did not help matters. Moral panics and mass hysteria were arguably far more prevalent in those days than they are now. However, despite our often self-professed levels of modernity and intellectual sophistication, these same phenomena still persist to this very day, obviously. But sometimes, in the very rarest of occasions, there does prove to be the slightest kernel of truth to these types of rumors. Now, despite persistent rumors within the occult folklore, no verified contemporary newspaper articles, police reports, or official records link Dr. Leroy Crandon to any cases of missing children. One might wish to point out, however, that Marjorie and Dr. Crandon were very much ensconced within the Boston Brahmin elites of the time. Although it seems the totality of any negative press directed their way mainly detailed accounts of how the Crandon seances and trials focus mostly on mediumship, fraud allegations, not child-related crimes, occultist and conspiracy literature sometimes includes vague references to the Crandons' involvement in darker occult networks allegedly tied to child exploitation or trafficking. These references are often found in posthumous writings, sensationalist books, or alternative history narratives, but lack citation of primary sources. Rumors such as these often stem from a conflation of spiritualist activities that involve children or youths in seances as observers or participants, early 20th century urban legends about occult groups abusing children, or the moral panics prevalent at the time revolving around, once again, baby farms, or illegal adoption rings and child trafficking in urban areas. Some conspiracy theorists argue that the Crandons were connected to secret occult societies with alleged ritualistic use of children. That seance ectoplasm manifestations might have involved exploitation of vulnerable individuals, including minors. That perhaps Dr. Crandon's medical background was used to facilitate or cover up certain illicit activities. Houdini's correspondence from the 1920s reveals his deep skepticism toward spiritualist mediums and his persistent investigations into Marjorie Crandon's claims. His letters often discuss attempts to uncover fraud and express frustration with the difficulty of exposing her conclusively. From a letter to J. Malcolm Bird, 1924, Houdini discusses Marjorie's seances, acknowledging some phenomena are puzzling, but expressing belief that trickery is involved. He mentions Dr. Crandon as a key figure supporting Marjorie, often shielding her from scrutiny. In a letter to Arthur Conan Doyle in 1925, Houdini challenges Doyle's belief in spiritualism. They used to be best buds, but this is what caused a rift between them. He specifically criticizes the Crandons and describes Dr. Crandon as, quote, an obstacle in exposing the medium's fraud. In a letter to Scientific American editors in 1926, Houdini requests stricter scientific controls over seances, citing Marjorie Crandon's case as emblematic of the problem. He also references Dr. Crandon's medical background as giving undue credibility to the medium. And this is the same for all of the extended social circle of the Boston Brahmin crew and just doctors, lawyers, just high society types that are lending this veneer of feasibility, at least, to the supernatural happenings during these quote-unquote performances. In private correspondence with detectives and journalists from 1924 to 1926, Houdini coordinates investigations into Marjorie's seances, often mentioning Dr. Crandon's interference or attempts to influence witnesses. Persistent suspicion of fraud, but respect for the difficulty of proving it is a common theme in much of Houdini's correspondence. The recognition of Dr. Leroy Crandon's role as a protector and promoter of Marjorie, and concern about the exploitation of the public and vulnerable individuals by mediums. That was the number one thing. Houdini could not abide the bullshit. The following are a few transcripts from further Houdini letters and writings related to Marjorie Crandon and her husband, Dr. Leroy Crandon, along with their sources. These focus on Houdini's investigations, suspicions, and commentary about the Crandons, and I'll include references so you can locate the full text if you wish. Once again, in a letter to J. Malcolm Bird, 1924. J. Malcolm Bird was a psychical researcher and associate of Houdini, and this letter discusses Houdini's views on Marjorie Crandon's mediumship. Excerpt says, quote, Marjorie's seances continue to baffle many, but I remain convinced that the manifestations are produced by trickery. The presence of her husband, Dr. Leroy Crandon, complicates matters. He acts as both guardian and promoter, often influencing the observations of investigators. Despite my efforts, exposing her fraud has proven elusive, largely due to their careful control over conditions. You can also find this letter in the Kalush and Solomon book, The Secret Life of Houdini, 2006, on page 198. Next up, we've got a letter to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Excerpt reads, quote, I regret to inform you that the Crandons are among the most frustrating examples of charlatanry. That's a word we need to bring back. Dr. Crandon, though a man of medicine, lends an unwarranted credibility to his wife's seances. I consider him an impediment to the truth. The public deserves better than these deceptions. Also this is in Houdini on Magic from 1996 on page 321. And then in the letter to Scientific American, the excerpt reads, quote, the mediumship of Marjorie Crandon exemplifies the urgent need for rigorous scientific controls. Her husband's role as a medical doctor should not shield them from proper investigation. The ectoplasm, quote unquote, and other effects witnessed appear to be produced under conditions that defy logical explanation. But on closer inspection, the possibility of deception is clear. That's from the Scientific American Archives, 1926. It's also referenced by Kalush and Sloman in The Secret Life of Houdini on page 234. And then in private correspondence with detectives and journalists, this is an excerpt from a letter to Detective John L. Leach, 1925. Quote, Dr. Crandon has been actively working to obstruct our inquiries. His status as a physician and husband gives him leverage to influence witnesses and control the environment of the seances. We must proceed carefully if we are to uncover the truth behind Marjorie's supposed powers. This is also referenced in The Secret Life of Houdini by Kalush and Sloman. Pretty much the main source for this entire episode, but there'll be a couple others. I'll mention them when they come up. Houdini on Magic, edited by Kenneth Silverman, 1996, as well. And also, I believe it's called Marjorie the Witch of Lime Street, which will come into play later as well. But they're also, this is where the way I've structured this episode, just to give you a little insight, the letters and the references to shenanigans, we'll say, and dark undercurrents of just weirdness and lewd sexuality taking place at these quote-unquote performances, these quote-unquote seances, I've kind of tiered it up to where it starts off, it's bad because, fraud. It's going to get progressively worse. I'm just letting you know. Preparing you for that before it happens. So, Marjorie Crandon's seances were famous for producing, quote-unquote, ectoplasm, a mysterious substance, if you're unaware. If you're unfamiliar, it's a mysterious substance that supposedly emanated from her body to form spirits or shapes. Critics and some investigators allege that the ectoplasm was often a fabricated material involving bodily fluids or tissue, occasionally involving partially nude or semi-nude displays to create illusions. Harry Houdini and scientific skeptics suspected ectoplasm was chewed paper, gauze, or muslin, which I believe is some kind of cherry cloth, maybe? I don't know. I'm just speculating. I have no idea what muslin is, but context clues. Chewed up in the mouth, sometimes with visible traces of blood or mucus, leading to suggestive and uncomfortable scenarios during the seances. These phenomena were often described as having a sexualized aura. The closed, dark seances, bodily exposure, and use of intimate parts of the body, i.e. the mouth, the chest, created an atmosphere ripe for speculation of erotic undertones. And I only use the word erotic for lack of a better term. This is also referenced in Collusion Sloman, The Secret Life of Houdini, 2006. And Marjorie, The Life and Times of a Famous Medium by George Slater, 1979. Seances sometimes involve Marjorie being touched or embraced by quote-unquote spirits, which were often materialized by assistance or manipulations by her husband, Dr. Crandon. Some accounts describe semi-intimate contact between Marjorie and the quote-unquote spirit figures, which critics interpreted as a cover for voyeuristic or lewd behavior, often in dim, smoke-filled rooms. Yeesh. Some seance attendees reported discomfort in the physical proximity and handling, or manhandling, if you will, often in near darkness, creating rumors of impropriety. It's a very 1920s way to put it, impropriety. This also fueled suspicions that seances were an elaborate form of sexualized theatrical performance, essentially blurring the lines between spiritualism and erotic spectacle. What's always put butts in seats, you know? This is sourced from reports from the skeptics in 1920s press. See Scientific American Critiques of Contemporaneous Exposés. Dr. Crandon was sometimes accused of orchestrating seances with a controlling and domineering presence, ensuring Marjorie's compliance and the maintenance of these illusions. Not only this, but rather frustratingly, his status as a medical doctor would indirectly lend an air of legitimacy to Marjorie's spiritual abilities, quote-unquote. Occult lore and some fringe writings speculate that Dr. Crandon might have pressured Marjorie into participating in sexually charged or ritualized acts to produce convincing spirit manifestations. There is no direct evidence from contemporary sources confirming such acts, but the dark, secretive atmosphere of seances and their social context fed into these rumors. However, a very widely circulated seance anecdote describes a spirit arm, quote-unquote spirit arm, an ectoplasmic limb that reportedly emerged from Marjorie's, let's say, ghost box, and engaged in physical contact with seance attendees, occasionally described in suggestive or intrusive ways. There's actually even a picture of this where the so-called spirit arm is seen shaking hands with paranormal investigator and one of the many alleged extramarital affairs of that Marjorie had with potential critics, a man by the name of Hereward Carrington. It's more than likely that these manifestations were fabrications, using hidden limbs or props, while rumors exaggerated the sexual nature of these interactions, blending spiritualism with erotic fantasy. But then there's all these pictures. So, I don't know. If you take a look at the profile picture I used for this episode, you will see the infamous handshake, which I'm referring to. As noted before, Houdini became a prominent debunker of fraudulent mediums in the 20s, and one of the most high-profile confrontations he ever had was with Mina Marjorie Crandon. Marjorie's rise coincided with the Scientific American's Prize competition, offering $2,500 to anyone who could demonstrate genuine paranormal abilities under controlled conditions. Controlled conditions. Science is very about that. Houdini, a member of the investigative committee, quickly grew suspicious of Marjorie's methods, alleging fraud, hidden tools, voice tricks, sleight of hand, etc. Tricks of his trade. Things he'd recognize. But what made this case unique wasn't just Marjorie's theatrical seances, it was the elite circle around her, and later allegations that darker things may have been happening behind closed doors. In the years following the public dispute, rumors emerged from the spiritualist and investigative community suggesting that Dr. Leroy Crandon, a prominent Harvard physician, by the way, may have leveraged their seances and social network to facilitate more than spiritual demonstrations. A few contemporary researchers and critics suggested that some of the Crandons' inner circle were engaging in sexually abusive or exploitative behavior, including possible trafficking or grooming of younger participants under the guise of quote-unquote spiritual training. Some Boston newspapers at the time hinted at quote-unquote orgiastic after-parties and a quote-unquote circle of influence around Marjorie that included very questionable sexual behavior. Houdini himself never publicly accused the Crandons of trafficking, but in his private notes and correspondences, including those housed in the Library of Congress and the Houdini collection at the Harry Ransom Center, he repeatedly referred to the Crandon circle as dangerous, morally corrupt, and quote-unquote evil in disguise. He believed they were manipulating vulnerable people. There's evidence Houdini intended to push for federal investigations into some of the more sordid rumors surrounding their activities, but his death in 1926 halted those efforts. Years later, researchers like Melvin Harris and more recently Paul Spachalski and Massimo Polidoro revisited the possibilities of hidden abuses within spiritualist circles, including Crandons. Once again, while no charges were ever brought against the Crandons for child trafficking or abuse, the combination of Houdini's aggressive investigation, press coverage hinting at sexual manipulation, allegations of misconduct within elite spiritualist circles, and private documentation suggesting moral corruption has led some researchers to speculate that Houdini was circling a much deeper scandal than mere seance trickery. The following documentation provides an overview of the investigations and controversies surrounding Mina Marjorie Crandon and her husband, Dr. Leroy Goddard Crandon, with particular attention to allegations of abuse, exploitation, and suspected child trafficking, as noted or implied in contemporary reports and Houdini's own writings. In Houdini's private notes on the Crandon seances, he writes, quote, I witnessed the so-called bell box manifestation with full view of the medium's lap. The small bell, supposedly operated by spirit control, was palpably rung by a toe. When I confronted Dr. Crandon, he laughed it off. What disturbed me more was the boy who had been brought into the seance room beforehand. No explanation was given. This is from Houdini's Seance Log 1924, the Library of Congress manuscripts, marginal notes. Houdini refers to a young assistant or observer in multiple seance reports, but no identity or explanation is ever provided in archival documents. In a press clipping from the New York Evening Graphic, November 2nd, 1925, quote, a former assistant of the Crandons claims he once saw a small, nude child emerge from behind the cabinet during a quote-unquote materialization demonstration. The child was led away by Dr. Leroy Crandon after the show, never to be seen again. The assistant was dismissed shortly afterward. This is an unconfirmed report, not corroborated by other papers, but later cited by the Psychic Observer in January of 1926 in their Crandon expose column. These reports, sometimes sensationalist, reflect a broader pattern in allegations tied to the Crandons, many involving manipulation of children, false identities, and exploitative cabinet tricks under the guise of spirit phenomena. Investigators noted a lack of formal records on some seance attendees and unusual access to children during private demonstrations. Deeper allegations of abuse, ritualized exploitation, and suspicious seance practices associated with Mina Marjorie Crandon and her husband, Dr. Leroy Crandon, include Houdini's Seance Log, Private Notes 1925, where he says, quote, there was another child at the house again, introduced as a quote-unquote visitor before the sitting. When the light went out, Marjorie took hold of my hand in a way that distracted me, and in the dark I heard breathing and the soft rustle of small feet near the cabinet. Leroy laughed when I asked who it was. I'm convinced this is the same boy I saw weeks ago. This is from a Houdini private notebook entry, summer 1925. Houdini repeatedly noted the presence of children or young assistants at the Crandon seances, never formally introduced, no record of their identity. The ambiguity of their roles raised suspicions among investigators but was never pursued formally. A report from the Psychic Observer, January 1926, quote, "A physician who declined to be named told our investigators that he once saw Marjorie place a small, unconscious child inside the seance cabinet shortly before a materialization session. The child was covered in gauze and said to be, quote-unquote, possessed by Walter, the spirit control. The same doctor claimed that the child was removed after the demonstration and not seen again." Walter, by the way, is... there's some dark, shady shit behind this as well. Walter is Marjorie Crandon's spirit control. It's her dead brother who was hit by a train, and whenever Walter would, I don't know, possess her, take over, essentially, he was the go-between to the rest of the spirit world. But Walter, he's a problematic fella. He is repeatedly saying and acting in ways that are very inappropriate, especially for 1920s decorum, I'll say. But there have been speculations that Marjorie and her brother at some point might have had a very unwholesome relationship, we'll say. That's neither confirmed nor brought up anywhere, but people have speculated on it due to the fact that this was her dead brother and the way that she more or less acted through him. So take it with an ocean of salt. Anywho, in a letter from Arthur Conan Doyle to Reverend F.H. Goddard in April 1926, he writes, quote, "You ask what I think of Marjorie. She has a great power, but uses it improperly. Too much sensuality around her. The circle is not clean. My spirit guide warns me of deeper currents and undercurrent of shadow." Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, in his private correspondence, can be found in the University of London Archives, Doyle to Goddard collection. Doyle remained publicly supportive of spiritualism, but expressed private reservations about Marjorie, whilst apparently also stating that she and her husband were essentially the face of the movement in America. This quote is from the letter, not widely circulated until the 1980s, I believe. Now, you're going to hear two different stories about Arthur Conan Doyle. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll stick where we are for now. So this is an excerpt from The Seance Murders by Charles Fielding in 1978. Now, should be noted, this book mixes actual journalism with speculation. And the source for the woman mentioned is unattributed, but the excerpt states, quote, "Leroy Crandon was said to be obsessed with Dion Fortune's ideas of sexual magic and psychic development. A nurse who had once served in their home told a later journalist that the doctor referred to some of their seances as quote-unquote initiation rites. It was whispered that Marjorie's Walter was more than a persona, that he was a projected sex demon created for these ceremonies." Yep, I will say that's quite a bit of speculation. While Dion Fortune did preach, I don't know if that's the right word, she talked about and wrote on the ideas of sex magic in a more wholesome manner than most sex magicians like Aleister Crowley and all those guys that you hear about. The dark shit. She was more of a spirit marriage type lady, very proper sort of thing going on. But she was somewhat more popular in that respect in those days. Then we've got the Boston Herald, April 14th, 1926. This quote says, "A new witness has come forward claiming he saw the Crandons' private cabinet room used outside of demonstrations, lined with silk and mirrors and heavy curtains. The witnesses alleged that children from nearby households were brought for games in the dark. Police were not able to confirm identities or gather statements. The Crandons deny any misconduct." It's from the Boston Herald local section, April 14th, 1926. Then we've got summary notes from Houdini's associate Joe Dunninger. These are undated, but he says, quote, She, Marjorie, Mina, used her sexuality as her strongest weapon. There were whispers about orgies among believers, and more than one seance that turned into what I can only call a ritual. Some of us began to fear she was channeling more than spirits, something else entirely. This is from the Dunninger Papers, American Society for Psychical Research Archives. There's certain themes and potential events emerging in the background when you put all this together. So there's the use of children in seances as unknown participants or vessels or symbols of some kind. There's sexual elements cloaked in spiritual or metaphysical terminology. A possible overlap with occult revival ideologies like Dion Fortune, sex magic, probably theosophy, because that was in everything back in the day. There's the creation of a quote-unquote private circle or cultic inner circle, possibly blending belief and ritual. Continued patterns of withheld identity in records for seance attendees. And then there's the Crandons' protected status in Boston elite society, which blocked formal charges. Now, we're about to head into a little bit more darker territory. There's disturbing seance testimony, excerpts from the seance records between 1923 and 1926, where Marjorie, allegedly under trance, engaged in disturbing or sexualized displays. These include Walter manifesting physically through Marjorie's body, often by way of crude or sexually explicit speech and actions. The 1924 incident recorded by Malcolm Bird, where Marjorie's undergarments were removed mid-trance while confined in a cabinet. There's allegations from Houdini's magician assistants that seance participants were encouraged to grope Marjorie under the guise of quote-unquote phenomena. It's a phenomena. Say that much at least. Houdini had his own secret service, basically. He created his own sort of intelligence agency when pursuing these fraudulent mediums that also included his wife and niece, oddly enough. But yeah, it extended beyond that with other magicians, various dancers, showgirls, etc., just entertainment people. He had them all working for him in different aspects and degrees. We've got allegations against Dr. Leroy Crandon, reports from seance sitters and press correspondents that Dr. Crandon encouraged an eroticized atmosphere. There are apparently affidavits suggesting that Dr. Crandon may have used his medical access to exploit young female patients or spiritualist acolytes, though I could not find these affidavits. Dr. Crandon's involvement in gathering photographs of Marjorie in various states of undress, allegedly for scientific documentation. Right. Excuse me while I go scientifically document these photos. There's Houdini's private notes and suspicions, his diary entries from 1924 to 1925, citing fear that Marjorie was being used as bait to lure vulnerable women or girls into the Crandon household, a concern that physical mediumship was being used to justify criminal acts, and that marginal notations in his diary suggesting Houdini suspected an unseen racket involving blackmail or trafficking. There are notes on Frances, a teenage girl who allegedly lived with the Crandons and may have assisted in seances, but this is unverified. There's press coverage from 1926 Boston tabloids alluding to quote-unquote youthful victims drawn into quote-unquote sex rituals in the Crandon home, and anonymous letters sent to Houdini and to Scientific American referencing unholy conduct, quote-unquote, involving minors. There's contemporary press and investigative response from the time. Select Boston Herald and New York Evening Graphic excerpts from 1925 to 1927. Internal Scientific American memoranda expressing discomfort about the continuation of the Marjorie trials. They called them trials as, another word for tests. They were putting her to the task to see if she had specific abilities, etc. Houdini's unpublished 1926 letter to Arthur Conan Doyle, where he states, "Your Marjorie is no angel. She plays with souls and flesh." There's excerpts from the Psychic Mafia, Boston Herald Archives, selected pieces by R.B. Whitman from 1924 to 1926, Houdini's private scrapbooks and marginalia in the Library of Congress, Malcolm Bird's letters to J.B. Ryan, the father of parapsychology, Duke University Parapsychology Lab archives from the 1930s. Now, the other book I mentioned, The Witch of Lime Street, by David Jaher, I believe that's how you say it, sort of sends readers to the occult ferment of the 1920s, which is a haunted, dirty, industrialized hellscape, still reeling from the twin catastrophes of the Great War and the influenza pandemic, which together claimed over 100 million lives. So, obviously, everyone has lost someone. With millions of families broken and traditional belief systems in crisis, spiritualism flourished as a sort of surrogate faith, promising contact with the beyond in a world struggling to make sense of all this massive death. Mediums multiplied. Seances became parlor rituals. Even respected figures like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle turned, for lack of a better word, prophet of the New Age. He envisioned etheric realms and welcoming messages from the departed, including, he believed, from his own son, Kingsley, who succumbed to the flu just after surviving the war, which is, that's a 1-2 nut punch. It was in this emotionally supercharged atmosphere that Marjorie Crandon emerged, the glamorous, charismatic wife of Boston surgeon Dr. Leroy Crandon, and arguably the most famous psychic medium of the interwar period. And Marjorie's rise to notoriety came as she attracted the attention of Scientific American's prize committee, which had offered a cash reward to any medium who could demonstrate genuine paranormal ability under controlled conditions. Among the judges were Houdini himself, once somewhat into spiritualism, almost sort of a believer, but now an arch skeptic after repeated failures to contact his mother through psychic means. Where others had failed, Marjorie enthralled. Her seances were theatrical, sexually charged affairs involving ghostly voices, phantom touches, and most infamously, ectoplasm, the semi-transparent substance allegedly exuded from Orify during spirit communication. While many observers were seduced, in every sense of the word, Houdini remained defiantly unimpressed, and the great magician saw through the illusions. Saw through the bullshit, often replicating her feats himself. But the deeper he dug, the darker the implications became. Marjorie's charms extended well beyond the seance room. Several male investigators, among them the aforementioned Hereward Carrington and Eric Dirty Ding Dingwall, seemed to have been emotionally and physically compromised by Marjorie. Dingwall, a research officer from the Society for Psychical Research in Britain, initially vouched for her powers and abilities, only to recant once he was back in the UK. Post-ectoplasm clarity, perhaps? Carrington allegedly was more entangled. He may have helped suppress fraud on her behalf. Then there was Malcolm Bird, the Scientific American liaison, whose alleged misbehavior during a seance, which allegedly involved a prostitute and an act of public urination, tarnished both his objectivity and the committee's credibility. Hey, a sex worker taking a piss on someone in a public place. That'll do that. That'll ruin your credibility. At the heart of this tangled saga lies Dr. Leroy Crandon, Marjorie's husband, promoter, and possibly something far more sinister. A respected physician among the Boston Brahmin elite, Crandon had a reputation for charm, power, and discretion, especially in matters of illegal abortion. But rumors swirled darker still. Witnesses suggested a disturbing pattern. The Crandons had taken in multiple young boys, quote-unquote adopted or fostered unofficially, only for them to vanish from public view without a trace. The whispers pointed towards illegal adoptions, or worse, child trafficking. A few speculated even more nightmarish theories: clandestine medical experiments, PDF files, the raw outlines of what would later be associated with the name Mengele. That's probably a stretch, but who knows? None of this was ever proven, yet the trail of innuendo and evasive testimony grew difficult to ignore. Even Crandon's stepson, John, Mina's child from a prior marriage, offered chilling glimpses into the household's shadowy goings-on. Though he defended his stepfather, he described him as a bit of a psychopath. So That's a ringing endorsement from your stepson. John would go on to subject himself to bizarre self-experimentation as a medical student, deliberately inducing scurvy and other illnesses. His behavior, some have argued, bordered on ritualized self-harm, possibly guilt-driven, or an attempt at psychological atonement, perhaps. Ultimately, the Marjorie case disintegrated not through confession, but exhaustion. Houdini's relentless public skepticism, a growing body of exposed fraud, and shifting scientific attitudes towards psychic research eroded the committee's support. And by the time Houdini died in 1926, the Crandons' influence had waned. Yet, the story of Marjorie Crandon remains emblematic of its time. A strange intermingling of grief, desire, technological wonder, and the erotic lure of mystery. It was the dawn of radio and air travel, of psychic warfare and modern celebrity. It was also the twilight of the Victorian soul, a moment when science and seance danced together in the dark, and no one could quite tell who was leading whom or whose hand that was on that certain part of your anatomy. Eventually, World War II put the kibosh on all this stuff, and the second round of massive amounts of death and atomic bombs. Nobody really wanted to talk to dead people anymore, huh? Isn't that weird? Strange how that works. Houdini had found out the Crandons had adopted an English boy, yet there was never any child around said to be their child. The Crandons said the boy was sent back to England because he wasn't a good fit, which I love the joke, but you can't do that in real life. Houdini was friends with an MP in England, Harry Day, his former tour manager, no less, who kept sending him letters saying they looked into it but could never find the boy. This is one of the more disturbing and underexplored angles of the Crandon case, and there are breadcrumbs worth following. According to Houdini's private notes, and mentioned by some biographers, Marjorie and Leroy Crandon claimed to have adopted an English boy at some point during the mid-1920s. Once again, however, no verifiable appearances of the child exist in photographs, press coverage, or known guest recollections from the Crandon household, and they had tons of people coming through there. They later stated the boy had been sent back to England because he was not a good fit for the family. In Houdini, A Magician Among the Spirits, and in unpublished papers held in the Library of Congress, Houdini writes, "They tell me the boy was a ward. No name, no school, no papers. He's vanished." Houdini was corresponding with Harry Day, Member of Parliament in England, former tour manager, who was possibly connected to the Home Office or Child Welfare Boards. Multiple letters were sent back to Houdini saying no child matching that description or claim could be found in immigration, repatriation, or adoption records. Houdini reportedly became very disturbed by this inconsistency, and it fueled his belief that something more sinister was going on in the Crandon household. Interestingly, mainstream press makes almost no mention of the child. Only rumors and speculative remarks appear in spiritualist gossip columns and editorials. The New York Evening Graphic, a sensationalist tabloid, ran a piece in 1926 implying, quote, "The lady medium once took in a foreign child. What became of him? The spirits are silent." How droll. What a... I don't know, I guess the decorum wasn't so great back then all the time. But no name or age was given. Now, what might be going on here? This story intersects uncomfortably with the more lurid allegations mentioned earlier, circulating around spiritualist circles and specifically the Crandons at the time. That Dr. Crandon was trafficking or possibly grooming vulnerable individuals under the guise of spiritual study. That Marjorie's seances involved underage assistants or exploited dependents, possibly hidden in plain sight. The lack of immigration or school records tied to the adopted boy could imply A, he never existed, that was a fabrication. B, he was smuggled in or used unofficially, and the quote-unquote sent back story was a cover for the disappearance. Or C, he was part of a deeper criminal arrangement, something Houdini seemed to suspect but could never prove. I did find this from the book Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, one of my favorite go-tos of just general weird history in America by David McGowan. It's a big source in our previous Laurel Canyon, well, of course it would be. Anywho, Houdini lived in Laurel Canyon for a time before it became what it would eventually become. And in this book, David McGowan says, Houdini had a number of friends in the spiritualist movement, most notably and prominently Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of fictional detective Sherlock Holmes and possible perpetrator of the infamous Piltdown hoax of 1912. Both Doyle and Houdini had connections to Leroy and Marjorie Crandon, and that is where the story takes a decidedly dark turn. Marjorie, born Mina Stinson in Canada in 1888, had moved with her family to Boston at a young age. She is said to have been a musical prodigy and to have played various musical instruments in local orchestras, and to later have worked as an actress, secretary, and ambulance driver. In 1917, the then married Mina was hospitalized and operated on by Dr. Leroy Goddard Crandon, a man who occupied a prestigious position in Boston society. Crandon was a direct descendant of one of the original 23 Mayflower passengers and a member of the Boston Yacht Club. Oh, so you know he's bad news. He had graduated from Harvard Medical School and had also obtained a master's degree in philosophy from Harvard, where he also served as an instructor. Just before meeting Mina, he had served as a naval officer and as head of the surgical staff at a U.S. naval hospital during World War I. Shortly after meeting the doctor, Mina divorced her first husband and in 1918 became the much older Leroy Crandon's third wife. The two seemed hopelessly mismatched, she being young, vivacious, and by all accounts very attractive, while he was said to be rather arrogant, unpleasant, and antisocial. Nevertheless, the pair quickly became the talk of Boston's high society, particularly after the summer of 1923, when they began holding regular seances in their home. One regular member of the couple's inner circle was a fellow by the name of Joseph de Wyckoff, Dewykkoff, a wealthy steel tycoon who had been born in Poland and educated in England and Tsarist Russia before settling in America to practice law. He was ultimately jailed in Boston on embezzlement charges, then later fled to Chicago after embezzling yet more money. He soon turned up in, of all places, Havana, Cuba, where, according to Kooks and Sloman, writers of The Secret Life of Houdini, in 1898 he was recruited by a man named John Wilkie, Wilkie, the Secret Service chief, as a co-optee that was involved in spying for the United States during the Spanish-American War. That would be, needless to say, the very same John Wilkie who had kick-started Harry Houdini's career that very same year. As a reward for his service, de Wyckoff, who had a history of violence, was given the contract to salvage the battleship Maine in the Havana harbor. The Maine had been sunk in what appears to have been a false flag operation carried out by U.S. intelligence operatives to justify launching a bloody colonial war. Although fragmentary, there is clear evidence that Leroy and Mina Crandon, in conjunction with various others, including de Wyckoff, began to quote-unquote adopt, sometimes soon after getting married, an untold number of children who subsequently went missing. A number of letters that Dr. Crandon penned on the subject and dispatched to his buddy Arthur Conan Doyle appeared to have gone missing as well. As Kooks and Sloman note, strangely, many of the letters regarding the investigation into the boys have been expunged from the Crandons' files. As faithful readers know, there is nothing strange about that at all. It's pretty much par for the course. In one surviving letter, sent on August 4th, 1925, Crandon notes that about December 1st, I had Mr. de Wyckoff bring over a boy from London, home for possible adoption. In April 1925, our Secret Service Department at Washington received a letter saying that I had first and last 16 boys in my house for ostensible adoption, and that they had all disappeared. That's a quote from the letter. 4 years earlier, a Boston newspaper had reported that 2 boys had been rescued from a raft. One, 8-year-old John Crandon, the weird boy who called his stepdad, a bit of a psychopath. Remember him? Guy who was doing weird medical experiments on himself? 8-year-old John Crandon was Marjorie/Mina's son from her previous marriage. The other was a 10-year-old English quote-unquote adoptee who was reportedly so unhappy at the Crandon home that he was frantically attempting an escape with the younger boy in tow. 2 years later, when Marjorie began her mediumship, There was no trace of that boy in the household. That's another quote from the letter. Perhaps he was the quote-unquote homeless boy whose dead body was reportedly found on the outskirts of Joseph DeWickoff's large estate in Ramsey, New Jersey during that time. By 1924, Dr. Crandon was openly asking his many friends in the British spiritualist movement to, quote-unquote, be on the lookout for suitable boys to adopt. Around that same time, as another associate noted in a letter, Crandon was, quote, being sued for $40,000 for operating on a woman for cancer when she was simply pregnant and destroying the fetus. Yeesh. A highly incredible story which persists is that a boy who was in his family some weeks mysteriously disappeared. He claims that the boy is now in his home in England, but still official letters of inquiry and demand are received from that country. This is no mere rumor, for I was shown some of the original letters. The matter has been going on for more than a year. It is very mysterious. In response to questions raised about the disappearance of one particular boy, Marjorie complained that people wrote asking his whereabouts, and the Prime Minister of England cabled to ask where he was and demanded a cable reply. She goes on to state why people even said Dr. Crandon committed illegal operations on little children and murdered them. According to Marjorie, quote, the poor little fellow had adenoids and had to be circumcised. Weren't adenoids in your neck? I could be wrong on that. So Crandon opted to perform the surgery at home. Weird. It was widely rumored that the good doctor had performed another procedure at home as well, surgically altering his wife's vaginal opening to allow her to magically produce various items at seances. Jeez, I'm crow. On one occasion, Marjorie opened a closet in her home and showed an associate a collection of photos of well over 100 children. Most of them really lovely, she said. Marjorie told the woman that, quote, those are Dr. Crandon's cesareans. Aren't they sweet? All cesareans. Given that Crandon wasn't known for delivering babies at all, the notion that he had delivered over 100 of them via cesarean was an absurdity. Who then were all these children, and what became of them? Such is the fragmentary evidence trail indicating that an untold number of young boys fell into the nefarious hands of a cabal of wealthy individuals with connections to the intelligence community, no less, nearly a full century ago. Not to worry, though. The disappearances were investigated by John Wilkie's Secret Service and British MP by the name of Harry Day. Now, this is exactly the kind of deep fringe historical thread that demands some attention. It's possibly one of the more explosive and under-researched allegations associated with the Crandon case, and the fact that not only McGowan, but Kalush and Sloman, and possibly British MP Harry Day are triangulating on it. It gives it a little bit of backbone. Here's what we can surmise from this excerpt and how it aligns with verifiable history. Leroy and Marjorie Crandon allegedly adopted numerous boys. Crandon's own letter, August 4th, 1925, allegedly confirms he had Mr. DeWickoff bring over a boy from London home for possible adoption. By April 1925, U.S. Secret Service received a letter claiming 16 boys had been in the Crandon home, quote, for ostensible adoption, unquote, and that all had disappeared. This matches Houdini's suspicions that a foreign boy was adopted and then vanished, but extends it much darker, horrible. So, the rescue of the two boys from a raft. A Boston newspaper article, circa 1921, reportedly described two boys being rescued from a raft. One was John Crandon, formerly known as Alan Rand, Mina's biological son, but he decided to change his name once Mina married Dr. Leroy Crandon. The other was a 10-year-old English boy attempting to escape. By 1923, when Marjorie began doing seances, the second boy was gone. According to a friend's letter, the British PM himself cabled Crandon, demanding the boy's whereabouts. This correlates with Houdini's MP contact in Britain, suggesting some official-level pressure was building. One visitor reports Marjorie opened a closet containing over 100 photos of children, saying, those are Dr. Crandon's cesareans. Aren't they sweet? Since Crandon was not an obstetrician, and there's no record of him performing 100-plus births, this implies that those children were from some other unexplained source. Key names to track here, other than Dr. Leroy Crandon and Marjorie themselves, are Joseph DeWickoff, the wealthy tycoon, ex-lawyer, U.S. intelligence co-op, and alleged child procurer. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, correspondent of Crandon, whose letters are missing or destroyed. There's British MP Harry Day, reportedly investigating these boys' disappearances, or the specific English boy at least, and former tour manager of Houdini. It's just an odd circle of connections. It's strange. Then you have John Wilkie, U.S. Secret Service chief, Houdini patron, another Houdini patron who is also involved in intelligence, possibly involved in a cover-up. Collusion Sloman in the Secret Life of Houdini. It's a real, respected, well-researched book. It includes shocking claims about Houdini's ties to intelligence, Crandon's occult ties and missing letters. McGowan's Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon is a tad more conspiratorial, but often sourced from primary material and cross-references known history. The name Harry Day is historically accurate. He was a labor politician from 1871 to, he was born in 1871, died in 1939, and it's plausible he would have engaged in parliamentary inquiries. As mentioned before, many letters have been quote-unquote expunged from the Crandons files, whatever that means. Weird how that happens a lot. Likely intentional suppression, possibly by U.S. or British authorities. Use of the 1925 Crandon letter. This is the one with that mentions says about December 1st. I had Mr. DeWickoff bring over a boy from London, home for possible adoption. The raft incident is a press-documented but now obscure early clue. This all ties into Houdini's missing boy suspicion with the letter from the British PM and Harry Day's involvement. These are real historical connections, even if the deeper implications are speculative. The missing children photos as an unresolved and, frankly, disturbing anecdote, one that fits the broader narrative of unofficial adoptions, quote-unquote, and the possible misuse of spiritualism as a cover for trafficking. Continued from David McGowan's Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. According to Coalition Sloman, shortly after meeting with Eddie and Lovecraft, that's right, H.P. Lovecraft, he and Houdini worked together for a time. Bess, Houdini's wife, was stricken with a nonspecific form of poisoning. Indeed, there's evidence suggesting that both Harry and Bess Houdini suffered from some form of poisoning prior to Harry's death. In addition, Houdini is said to have suffered from severe mood swings and to have had some aggressive confrontations in the weeks leading up to his death, both of which were out of character for the illusionist, though Bess is widely reported to have suffered from extreme mood swings throughout her life. As the story goes, Houdini, who prided himself on being able to take a punch from pretty much anyone, was sucker punched in his dressing room by a McGill University student. Actually, he's punched 5 times in a row, which caused his appendix to burst and ultimately led to his death on Halloween 1926. Houdini's physicians dutifully swore out affidavits certifying the cause of death to be, quote, traumatic appendicitis, though the medical community now acknowledges that such a medical condition has never existed. No autopsy was performed. As previously noted, the house in Laurel Canyon, universally known as the Houdini House, burned to the ground exactly 33 years later on Halloween 1959. Precisely 52 years, the magician's age, the time of his death. After that, the Magic Castle in the Hollywood Hills exploded into flames on October 31st, 2011. Conspiracy. No, this is the height of synchronicity to a ridiculous degree. Built as a Victorian mansion in 1908, the converted structure opened in 1963 as the Magic Castle, a rather creepy members-only club featuring hidden rooms and secret passageways. According to reports, the only room in the building left unscathed by the fire was the Houdini room. The mid-1920s were not a good time for the Houdini/Weiss brothers. His real name, Eric Weiss. Brother Gottfried Weiss, born 2 years after Houdini, died in 1925. Harry followed suit the next year. Brother Nathan Weiss, born 4 years before Harry, died soon after in 1927. Shit happens, I guess. On June 22nd, 1927, Houdini's European booking agent, Harry Day, the aforementioned Harry Day, reported that his apartment had been ransacked. That day would have also been the Houdini's wedding anniversary, assuming, that is, that Harry was actually legally married to Bess, which may not have been the case. 2 months after the break-in at Harry Day's apartment, Theodore Hardin, who had inherited all of Brother Harry's props, Harry Houdini's brother, became Hardin. He inherited all of his props, effects, and papers, and reported that his home had also been broken into while he had been on the road. Jocelyn Gordon Whitehead, the guy credited with gut-punching Houdini, is a rather curious gentleman. Though a college student at the time of the incident, he was already in his 30s. Okay? His father was a British diplomat serving in the Orient. After Houdini's death, Whitehead is said to have become a recluse, living something of a hermetic existence. He did have at least one close associate, though, Lady Beatrice Isabel Marlar, a wealthy heiress and the wife of Sir Herbert Meredith Marlar, a prominent Canadian politician and diplomat who once served as Canada's ambassador to the U.S. After Houdini's death, it was widely rumored that Bess, who in addition to suffering from wild mood swings, was also an alcoholic and a drug addict who was occasionally suicidal, had run an illegal speakeasy/brothel in conjunction with a woman named Daisy White, who was said to have been Harry's mistress. Nothing weird about that. White was not, by the way, the only woman who claimed or was rumored to have had an affair with Houdini. In mid-1945, Theodore Hardin, one of Houdini's 2 surviving brothers and the one who inherited all of his effects, checked into Doctor's Hospital for a scheduled operation. On June 12, 1945, Hardin left the hospital in a pine box. It was reported at the time that Hardin had been planning to pin a book on his brother and begun work on the project before checking into the hospital. Nearly 2 decades later, on October 6, 1962, Leopold Weiss, Harry's last living sibling, and the one who had been brutally attacked in his brother's home, is said to have jumped off a ledge and fallen 6 stories to his death. The last of Houdini's secrets went to the grave with him. Could this narrative possibly provide the true story behind Houdini's untimely demise? Now, I was mostly focusing in more on the purported break-ins and the thefts as very suspicious. However, all these ties to early intelligence agencies certainly make things much murkier. We need to take another look at Harry Day as well. Former tour manager Harry Day, born Edward Louis Levy, 1880, died in 1939, started life in the U.S. before moving to England. He began working with circuses and eventually became involved in theater management. Early in the 1900s, he began managing Harry Houdini's European tours. He played a key role in getting Houdini booked at the Alhambra Theatre in London and even arranged a pivotal performance for Scotland Yard in which various alterations were made to their processes and ways of doing things according to his escapist abilities. Later, Harry Day entered politics, becoming the Labour MP for Southwark Central from 1924 to 1931, and again from 1935 until his death in 1939. The same Harry Day who helped launch Houdini in Europe later became a British MP, ensuring correspondence or inquiries involving Houdini and British officials, potentially including the quote-unquote missing boy or break-in stories that could have gone through his office. References in some accounts to Houdini's tour manager Harry Day and British intelligence/MP inquiries are pointing to the same individual, bridging Houdini's stage career and political presence. Official records note break-ins at both Harry Day's apartment in June 1927 and later at Theodore Hardin Weiss's home, occurring on Houdini's anniversary, which fuels suspicions of potential covert targeting. Given Day's dual identity as an MP and a former magician stage manager, any theft or burglary could have been more than a random crime, possibly linked to Houdini-related materials or investigations, especially since Day retained Houdini's correspondences and memorabilia. So yes, Houdini's UK tour manager and MP Harry Day, same man, a unique figure, whose career spanned entertainment, politics, and possibly intelligence. This intersection adds significant intrigue to those break-ins and missing documents. His apartment was both a showbiz nerve center and a political office, a plausible treasure trove that Houdini's opponents might have targeted. Now, I'm going to include this last part because it kind of goes a further way in illustrating that spiritualism, in concurrence with a possible, let's say, occult elite working in secrets. I've sourced this information from a gentleman by the name of Matthew Arrett, who he did a series of articles called The Occult Tesla. By the way, Tesla was into eugenics. Sorry to burst your bubble on that one, but yeah, he was super into it. Anyway, Matthew Arrett has some interesting essay collections, and they're very intriguing, but some of the information is a little iffy. And although his occult histories are indeed fascinating, there seems to be quite a bit of misinformation throughout. However, I included this information gathered from his essay as a way of further illustrating, like I said, the existence of a potential occult elite. So, Kooks and Sloman reveal that Harry Houdini not only employed his personal intelligence network to expose fraudulent mediums, but also uncovered child trafficking operations linking London to the United States, operations allegedly involving spiritualists such as the Crandons, and possibly even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, but I doubt that last part. This lesser-known dimension of Houdini's crusade featured an intriguing British member of Parliament named Harry Day. Harry Houdini, famed worldwide for his sensational escape acts and regarded as one of the most famous magicians in history, is also an underappreciated figure in the fight against occult deception and illicit trafficking. Beyond his public career, he used his private intelligence resources to combat fraudulent spiritualists and disrupt trafficking networks operating transatlantically. Given the numerous death threats Houdini received from powerful spiritualists on both sides of the Atlantic and his vigorous opposition to burgeoning occult revivals in the United States, some speculate the official narrative of his death at age 52 may be more myth than fact. One figure worth examining in this context is Sir William Kooks, a prominent scientist and alleged occultist who served as president of the British Royal Society in 1913. Kooks, a Rosicrucian high priest and leading member of the British Society for Psychical Research, embodied the intersection of science and occult revival during this period. The occult revival sought to reorganize the waning British Empire and aspired to establish a new world religion in spirit channeling, a syncretic blend of Western Gnosticism and Hermeticism fused with Eastern mysticism as articulated by the Theosophical Society. This is Matthew Arrett's opinion. Let me restate that. Just say it. So, born Erich Weiss in Hungary in 1874, Houdini immigrated to the United States at age 4. Inspired by stage magic, he mastered the craft, rose to fame, first breaking through at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. He adopted the stage name Harry Houdini in homage to a French illusionist, Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin. According to the comprehensive 2006 biography, The Secret Life of Houdini by Kooks and Sloman, Houdini was recruited by U.S. intelligence somewhere around 1899, coinciding with his growing international fame, which included performances for presidents, royalty, and diplomats across Europe and Russia. In 1900, Houdini met William Melville, M from James Bond, then the head of Scotland Yard's Special Branch and later co-founder of British intelligence agency MI6. From this time onward, Houdini collaborated with police, military, and intelligence officials across the United States, conducting seminars on handcuff escapes, lockpicking, and other techniques useful for both criminals and secret agents. Historically, magicians have wielded considerable influence, often leveraging scientific secrets to manipulate perception, a timeless tool of power. This tradition extends from ancient magi and hierophants through Elizabethan England, where John Dee, the original 007, worked alongside his channeler Edward Kelly, laying foundations for the Rosicrucian transformation and coining the phrase, the British Empire. Dee's followers and figures such as Sir Francis Bacon helped establish the British Royal Society, which covertly engaged in alchemy and esoteric rituals, even as Sir Isaac Newton pursued numerology within the quote-unquote invisible college of secret scholars. Crowley, who later worked for British intelligence, believed himself the reincarnation of Dee's Scryer Kelly. During World War I, Crowley collaborated with William Wiseman, head of MI5's New York branch. In World War II, Crowley's occult influence extended to MI6 via Ian Fleming, whose James Bond characters amalgamated traits of Dee and occultist by the name of Sidney Riley. In fact, the villain Blofeld was reportedly inspired by Crowley himself. Fleming's boss M was based on William Melville, Houdini's early contact. Crowley acknowledged the relationship between espionage and occultism in his 1917 novel Moonchild, stating, quote, "Investigation of spiritualism makes a capital training ground for Secret Service work. One soon gets up to all the tricks," unquote. In 1917, Houdini and Crowley both worked in New York, producing films on magic, though with contrasting agendas. Crowley's The Mysteries of Myra promoted supernatural occultism, while Houdini's The Master Mystery exposed conspiracies suppressing new inventions. The Master Mystery featured a Justice Department agent infiltrating a shadowy industrial cartel controlling inventions and included one of the earliest cinematic demonstrations of an automaton robot as a villainous device. Houdini did do a few movies. They're very much products of their time, I'll say that. Following the success, Houdini founded the Houdini Picture Corporation in 1921, producing films such as The Man from Beyond in 1921 and Haldane of the Secret Service in 1923. The latter portrayed a secret agent modeled on Viscount Richard Burden Haldane, co-founder of British intelligence, who confronts a satanic cult disguised as a Catholic monastery. Reminds me of a little film called Dragnet. Anywho, Houdini described one villainous character as the chief of secret government police in an unproduced film, The Marvelous Adventures of Harry Houdini, as, quote, "a suave, polished gentleman and silent as the Sphinx," inspired by one William James Flynn, director of the U.S. Secret Service and early FBI, who purged corruption from the New York City Police Department. Historian Richard B. Spence notes in Secret Agent 666 that Crowley's New York backers included John Quinn, an agent in the elite Sleepy Hollow Club, a private intelligence nexus funded by families such as the Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, and Morgans. Senator Nelson Aldrich and President Wilson's advisor, Edward Mandel House, both instrumental in founding the Federal Reserve and IRS, were also members. British agent Claude Dancy operated covertly from the Sleepy Hollow Club between 1911 and 1914, founding parallel intelligence structures that evolved into U.S. agencies like the Black Chamber, which is the precursor to the NSA, largely concerned with cryptographic analysis, etc. Dancy served as a deputy director at MI5 alongside Haldane and Melville, raising questions about Anglo-American intelligence influence over the U.S. government. During World War II, Dancy created the Z Organization, linking British occult intelligence, Nazi occult networks, and including Crowley. Historian Robert Marshall documents Dancy's role in sabotaging resistance networks in occupied Europe. William J. Flynn, who collaborated with Houdini, led the FBI from 1917 to 1919, but clashed with Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer's harsh Palmer raids. Flynn retired early and later produced films exposing fraudulent mediums. Houdini's connection to American, British, and Russian patriots and dark forces alike raised the question, where did Houdini's loyalties lie? His writings provide insight. In Miracle Mongers and Their Methods, 1920, he stated, quote, "My business has given me an intimate knowledge of stage illusions, together with many years of experience among show people of all types, allowing me to uncover the natural explanation of feats that to the ignorant have seemed supernatural." In A Magician Among the Spirits, 1924, Houdini lamented that the power held by occult high priests and magi over the credulous, criticizing scientists who accepted mediumistic testimony without rigorous scrutiny. During the final 6 years of his life, Houdini dedicated himself to exposing spiritualism's rise, serving as president of the Society of American Magicians from 1917 to 1926. Researcher Matthew Ehret describes the British Society for Psychical Research, led by Kooks, allegedly a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, as central to organizing spiritualism, a new post-Christian religion blending demonology and paranormalism. I should note, however, there is no documented evidence that Sir William Kooks, nor Arthur Conan Doyle, nor, while I'm at it, Bram Stoker, were ever members of the Golden Dawn. Ehret's claims here lack primary source support and may reflect an overextension of association. Essentially, he believes, as far as I can tell, that inclusion in one wacky supernatural group precludes engagement with all others. So, I mean, there's tons of documented letters and correspondence between members, and internal and external, from the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and none of it mentions any of these people as members. So that's my only problem with this dude's overlook on history. But like I said, nonetheless, it is interesting. It's interesting stuff. You should check it out. In 1924, Houdini criticized Kooks for credulity, citing his acceptance of trickery by medium Annie Eva Fay. Throughout his campaign, Houdini confronted leading figures of the British and American psychical research movements, including Arthur Conan Doyle, Hereward Carrington, and Sir Oliver Lodge, well-connected individuals who posed significant opposition. By World War I, Doyle had become a prominent controller of America's spiritualist movement, this is according to Ehret, working with Lodge and Kooks through the British Society for Psychical Research. Doyle, who was enamored with theosophy, wrote for the Pall Mall Gazette alongside imperialists such as Lord Milner, Rudyard Kipling, H.G. Wells, and Annie Besant. Annie Besant would be the person who would take over the Theosophical Society after Blavatsky was no more. H.G. Wells, one of the main founders of the Fabian Society, architects of the New World Order. I won't mince words there. Doyle's imperial service included work with Winston Churchill, Claude Dancy, and Lord Milner during the Boer War, earning a knighthood in 1902 for supporting British colonial policies, something that he shared with Kipling. The Pall Mall Gazette was a mouthpiece for the Rhodes Balfour Roundtable Group, interfacing with the Fabian Society to promote imperial and geopolitical agendas. I believe it's something that Rudyard Kipling referred to as the white man's burden. Anywho, in 1912, Doyle oversaw the Piltdown Man hoax, an elaborate fake fossil intended to bolster Darwinism's credibility by discovering, quote-unquote, a missing evolutionary link. This deception was uncovered decades later. During World War I, Doyle, Kipling, Wells, and a fellow by the name of Cust collaborated in Britain's War Propaganda Bureau, deploying psychological warfare to manipulate public opinion and demonize the Germans as baby-eating Huns, essentially. Doyle believed Houdini practiced dark arts, despite Houdini's constant insistence on rational explanations for all his tricks. Doyle's credulity extended to spirit photographs, a fad popularized by Kooks in the 1850s. Plus, there was the whole fairy photos thing. I don't know. It's so strange that the man who wrote the ultra-rationalist archetype of Sherlock Holmes, I don't know, if you want to believe, you just want to believe, I guess. I don't know. There's no stopping it. In A Magician Among the Spirits, Houdini explained common methods used in spirit photography, demonstrating how such images were fabricated. Houdini's mastery of replicating fraudulent psychic phenomena, such as telepathy, apparitionism, spirit photography. Apparitionism, for those who don't know, is just making stuff appear, like, oh, there's a coin on the table now. This allowed him to expose mediums effectively, aided by an extensive intelligence network and law enforcement contacts. He famously replicated British medium Gilbert Murray's telepathy tricks, inviting a committee including Wall Street millionaire Bernard Baruch and American Fabian leader Walter Lippmann to witness the demonstration, embarrassing the spiritualist movement in the process. Houdini's private home was wired with hidden dictaphones and induction coils to transmit information covertly, enabling him to outsmart even the most skilled mediums. Essentially, his house was wired for sound, but this was the exact same method that was being used by many mediums at the time. By the 1920s, Doyle was closely linked to powerful American occultists embedded in the White House and elite circles. Doyle believed the medium Marjorie Crandon was destined to become a high priestess in a new spiritualist religion foreseen by his spirit guides to arise after a major global catastrophe. Kalush and Sloman traced Marjorie Crandon's mediumship to an ancient tradition, comparing her to Eurycles of Greece, the famed pre-Delphic oracle who spoke through a quote-unquote demon voice from his chest. Marjorie, much like Eurycles, used theatrical tricks like ectoplasm oozing from her body, levitation, and channeling her deceased brother Walter to convince audiences of her supernatural powers. In 1926, Lady Doyle, Arthur Ignatius Conan Doyle, his wife, Lady Doyle, in 1926, a key spiritualist and conduit for a spirit demon, wrote to the Crandons predicting they would become central figures in a coming spiritual upheaval in America. She warned that Houdini, a fierce opponent of spiritualism, was quote-unquote doomed and would soon suffer for his efforts to expose mediums. In 1924, Houdini led a Scientific American investigation into Marjorie's claims, as we've seen already, joining a panel that included Hereward Carrington, a member of the Society for Psychical Research, who had a reputation for supporting fraudulent mediums. Carrington had managed the Italian medium Eusapia Palladino and co-authored a controversial report that admitted both fakery and some, quote, genuine supernatural phenomena, unquote. Despite Houdini and other panel members concluding Marjorie was a fraud, Carrington defended her, possibly influenced by a secret romantic relationship, as revealed years later by his assistant. The New York Herald Tribune praised Houdini's crusade against mediums as a fight against those preying on the grieving and the gullible. His work disrupted the spiritualist hopes of establishing a new American religion. But Houdini's battle was bigger than just exposing fraud. He built an extensive personal intelligence network, including undercover agents, showgirls, detectives, even his wife and niece, as mentioned before, to infiltrate and debunk spiritualist circles across the country. Most shockingly, Houdini's investigations uncovered child trafficking operations involving elite spiritualists like the Crandons and possibly Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. British MP Harry Day, Houdini's agent, helped expose networks trafficking children from London orphanages to America on the White Star Line. Some children disappeared, and they were linked directly to properties controlled by the Crandon Circle. This underworld clash deepened Doyle's hatred for Houdini. Doyle predicted Houdini's violent death as divine punishment for his anti-spiritualist crusade. Lady Doyle's spirit guide, or demon, called Phineas, P-H-E-N-E-A-S, even issued death threats through channeling sessions. Sorry. Meanwhile, spiritualists like William Elliott Hammond vowed to continue the fight against Houdini and his allies. In October 1926, Houdini's life came to a suspicious end. Officially, he died from peritonitis caused by a ruptured appendix, allegedly triggered by a young theology student, Jocelyn Gordon Whitehead, who repeatedly punched him in the abdomen 5 times. But the circumstances around Whitehead, son of a British consul linked to Canadian political elites, in the absence of an autopsy raised serious doubts. Houdini also received a mysterious secret serum shortly before his death. Doctors were the ones who applied this secret serum. Kalush and Sloman suggest Houdini's death was likely no accident, but a carefully orchestrated murder. Houdini had been the target of numerous death threats from powerful occultists and elites alike. Even Houdini's close friend, magician Max Malini, believed Houdini died because he challenged genuine believers like Doyle and Lodge. Efforts by Houdini's great-nephew to exhume the magician's body for toxicology tests were blocked by family members in the mid-2000s. leaving the true cause of Houdini's death an enduring mystery. Now, once again, take much of what I related from Matthew Ehret's writings with a grain of salt. However, much of what I included was fact-checked and verified, where unless I said otherwise. So it does point to a sort of occult elite. There is a long-standing tradition of occultists and intelligence agencies overlapping. I don't know so much about trying to establish spiritualism as a new American religion, but I could also see how many people, may have had some certain intentions and certain investments in creating a new religion. I mean, who doesn't want to do that? Look at L. Ron Hubbard. Oh, I didn't say that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's strange, but taking all of this into account, the vast amounts of circumstantial evidence, the he said, she said, it does point to something very strange and sinister going on. And if it's not outright criminal network trafficking, I do believe there was some sort of abuse taking place underneath a lot of this. Granted, I'm not saying this makes it good or better, but I don't know. Children were treated pretty much like slaves back in the 1920s. If you lived, you were sent to work in a cannery or on a farm, etc. But that doesn't make it any better. I don't know. It's strange. I couldn't even imagine what the primary purpose for having children involved in these seances and alleged displays of spiritualist ability. There are pictures of children coming out of these spirit boxes, like, with just harrowing looks on their faces. I don't understand what's going on with a lot of this stuff, but the spiritualist movement is a strange one. For every, I'm just gonna throw out some numbers just off the top of my head and say, for every 5% of authentic supernatural activity that may or may not have taken place, we obviously have 95% fraud. So, despite that, the spiritualist movement was worldwide. And this episode in particular, I wanted to focus on the overlap of the spiritualist movement with crime. And this is a good American introduction. In the next 2 episodes, possibly more, we're going to take a look at some international situations with spiritualist crime. I'm trying to keep this specifically in the realm of pre-World War II, but as I was delving deeper and deeper into this research, you start to see certain patterns emerge. And those certain patterns, I will say, it's the same in just about every country. I mean, I picked several very non-English countries. I don't want to give them away yet, you'll see. But, I thought these 3 countries were very indicative of a very specific culture. Very different from American / British culture, Anglo culture, whatever you want to call it. But all throughout these different cultures, you see the spiritualist overlap with crime. Not in every case. Some of these spiritualist groups are just, they're just trying to live and just get in touch with something other outside themselves. I totally get that. They're not all bad. They're not all evil. They're not all criminals. But there are certain groups with certain beliefs where you start to see the progression from this turn of the century occult revival, and within, let's say, 20 to 30 years, you begin to see what are the very first inklings of aliens. It's so weird. It switches from ghosts to aliens or star brothers or I don't know, just cosmic intelligences, we'll say. And then of course you have tons of groups who are into like the Ascended Masters and the Great White Brotherhood. Oh Jesus, these fucking. Anyways, so yeah, in the next couple episodes, we're gonna be doing a bit of a mini world tour of spiritualism intersecting with crime in some very specific cultures that I wanted to take a look at. And I got to tell you, in this research, I've unearthed some very, very weird stuff. Stuff that it seems like a cartoon, but it's real, and there's government documentation to back it up. So I don't know. I hope that whets your appetite for what may be coming down the road. I've been working on several episodes just to kind of get ahead of the game for the next few episodes, and I've got something really big planned for like a month or two down the line. I've got some really gross, horrible shit I can't wait to share with someone else to get it out of my mind. But these next few episodes, they're going to be quite crazy stuff. So I hope you'll tune in. Thank you for listening. I'm Mike Luck. This is Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast. I hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next week.
Hey, you want something to eat? I could go make you something in our haunted kitchen.